Part 6. Mr. Hope, to his credit, did not resist. He had glanced about the room, surprised but calm. "There's no need to keep your hands on me, sir. I know when I'm done. I've finished what I set out to do anyway. But how did you know?" Gregson looked as dumbfounded as I felt. "That's what I would like to know." Holmes smiled. "This man before you is Jefferson Hope, the American that killed both Drebber and Stangerson. Drebber by convincing him to take poison, and Stangerson by stabbing." Lestrade looked mildly annoyed. "We can see that he is your primary suspect, Holmes. Even I'm not so unobservant that I wouldn't acknowledge his blatant confession. Still, why in hell did he kill the men?" Hope looked at me and smiled. "I'll gladly tell you, officer. I'm a dead man anyway. If you would, doctor." He gestured for me to put a hand upon his chest. I glanced to Holmes, who gave a near imperceptible nod. Then I did as requested, laying my hand on his chest. I felt it beat for a few moments. I felt that irregular pulse indicative that something was wrong with his heart. I frowned. "Holmes, get my stethoscope." Before Holmes could comply, Hope put his hand over mine. "That's not necessary, doctor. I know well what I have. The aneurysm will likely kill me soon." Releasing my hand, he turned to Holmes. "I'm impressed that you were able to trace me. I had thought that I covered my tracks well. But that does not matter any more. Those evil men are dead, and I will take any punishment the English government deems fit, should I survive long enough to do so, of course." Holmes nodded. "I'm sure you have been through a great deal, losing the woman you loved to that man." Lestrade and Gregson looked perplexed. "Holmes, do fill us in on what this is." It was not Holmes that answered, though. "I am more than content to tell you my story, officer. That is, if you'll allow me to sit down. If I die in the middle, then you may not get all the answers you seek." Holmes quickly drew the man a chair, and he launched into his story. In 1907, a new doctor had recently begun his practice in a small town in Utah. Jefferson Hope was a pragmatic, practical man, having worked his way through medical school. He was excited to start life in this new little town. He set up in an old house, half being reserved for his office and patients, while the other half became his living quarters. A fine setup for a new doctor. Lucy Ferrier was the beauty of the town nearby. Everyone knew that multiple men were vying for her hand in marriage, and that fact surprised no one. What did surprise everyone was the fact that she was not yet married. Everyone, that is, except her father. Lucy's father was a fine, upstanding man in his church. Rather, he was the only upstanding man in his church. As such, he was not fond of the idea of Lucy marrying anyone within any of the surrounding towns. Lucy, not much fond of the men around her either, was content with this. The Ferriers visited the doctor's office in the town near them one afternoon. John Ferrier, having been suffering from a cough for some weeks that he couldn't seem to shake. This is where they met the young Dr. Jefferson Hope. Dr. Hope examined John in silence, then launched into his diagnosis. "It doesn't seem to me like you have pneumonia. It's likely the dust in the air that's bothering you. It can inflame the lungs and make people feel stuck. But there's an old native remedy that helps. Make tea out of stinging nettles. It soothes the irritation. In the meantime, I'll send you off with some of this cough syrup. It should start to take effect right away." "Oh, thank Providence! I've been so worried." Lucy very often worried about her father, much to the older man's annoyance. "I told you that it wasn't anything to be worried about, Lucy. You fret too much. It'll be the death of you." Dr. Hope smiled. "I don't see that there's anything wrong with a daughter being concerned for her father's health." Ferrier waved him off dismissively. "You would be saying very different if it were you held at gunpoint by my Lucy's fretting." Hope continued to smile, but only at Lucy. "I don't think I can agree with you, sir. I really don't." John Ferrier was not an unobservant man. He hadn't survived this long in the social nightmare that was his church purely by chance. The heads of the church had been pressuring him for far too long that it was time for Lucy to get married, and there were two men in particular that they had in mind: Joseph Stangerson and Enoch Drebber. Now, the church did technically have their hands tied. They were too far away from the bulk of the church's land and too near a disassociated town to just force the issue. Nevertheless, this was rural Utah. Anything could happen, and he had to be ahead of the local leaders. Dr. Hope was a traditional Protestant, so it would be of no small benefit if he could woo Lucy. He could get them out of their church-ruled town. Like many things, social escape is tricky and must be played out carefully. Ferrier was a well-off man. It was his crops that did the best, his herd that produced the greatest income. The leaders of his church wanted his daughter to marry one of their sons to inherit that wealth, but law was law, and they couldn't just force it, so social pressure ensued. In the meantime, Ferrier began to visit the neighboring towns, doctored just as often as he could justify. It paid off. Lucy fell for the young doctor and agreed to marry him. Thus Ferrier laid plans. He had already been selling more and more of his cattle, and he laid out a will. Half of his property would be bequeathed to his daughter after his death, while the other half would go to the church. It was his hope that the church would see this and begin to look in other directions. But greed is stubborn, and it encompasses not only money, but all things. On the day Lucy was to be married to Hope, she disappeared. She and her father had made it to town and had gone straight for the justice of the peace to have her married, but they never made it there. Hope and the justice set out to look for them, and in an alley they heard a cry and found John Ferrier laying there. Ferrier was out of his wits, and they took him straight to Hope's office. There he managed to spit out the words, "Stangerson! He took Lucy!" before losing consciousness. Hope and the local sheriff were able to form a posse to spread out and look for Lucy and her kidnappers, but they could not be found. Days passed, and the sheriff spoke to Stangerson's family, finding that the young man had disappeared on the same day as Lucy. "Sheriff, I assure you that we have no knowledge of where our son is, but it is unlikely he has anything to do with Miss Ferrier's disappearance. He felt rather jilted by her and was pursuing another young woman in our church." The head priest of the church was careful with his words. In an effort to protect his daughter, John Ferrier had not allowed her to be away from him, yet she had been taken, and he injured, which had not been what was agreed upon. The sheriff, having deliberately left Hope out of this conversation, simply requested that should the head priest find out anything, he be informed. After all, one cannot act rashly amongst such hostility. It was several days after this that Lucy was found. One of the members of the posse mentioned that there was an old hunting cabin up in the mountain which was owned by no one. If they hadn't left town, they could be there, and there Lucy was found, still and cold. A doctor was called in to examine the body, as Hope was in no state to do it himself. She had been violated harshly. Her skin had been torn so aggressively that it was more than apparent. Her engagement ring had also been taken, ripped off her finger so violently that there was a severe bruise. The examining doctor shook his head. What kind of man can think himself so entitled to another's soul that he would kill her just so that another could not have her? John Ferrier did not survive long after hearing news of his daughter's death. Grief over what is lost very often kills those among us who do not have the strength to carry on through such shock. Stangerson and Drebber were never seen in that town again, and Jefferson Hope disappeared not long after them. These events strained relations between the two towns beyond the breaking point. The Protestants and Catholics alike blaming that denomination to which Stangerson belonged. It was not long before that hated church's local temple was dissolved. Upon hearing this story, Gregson and Lestrade looked horrified, while Holmes looked stoic. Holmes spoke to fill in the rest for Hope, who had paused to catch his breath. "And you have been hunting Stangerson and Drebber ever since?" Hope nodded. "Stangerson kept the ring I gave Lucy as some sort of prize, I suppose. I had thought to retrieve it, but I wound up leaving in such a hurry that I managed to miss it. It was a friend of mine that retrieved the ring for me. He's an actor by trade, but he's a baker at the moment, so he can be of use to his country. He was more than happy to play the role to obtain the ring." Why did it take so long to track them down? Although Lestrade had spoken, I also wanted to know the answer. "I had to work. I managed to chase them across the U.S. to the East Coast. Then the war broke out. I guess they saw a good chance to get away with the way my health is. It took ages to find a ship that would take me to Europe. I had to bribe the captain at that." Holmes raised a brow in question. "I assume the men in question were being funded by their less-than-moral fathers?" Hope nodded. "Exactly." Gregson decided to interrupt. "Excuse me, what church would allow such awful behavior?" Holmes laughed. "Have you seen the history of the Catholic Church? But I do believe that Mr. Hope is referring to the Mormons." I had cut Holmes off, causing the men to look at me, so I explained more clearly. "The followers of Joseph Smith. They claim to be Christian, but many of their beliefs tend to contradict what Christ said." Hope smiled wryly. "You've experienced them, then?" "My aunt married a man who forsook that church. He had to run as far as the West Coast before he was given peace." Lestrade and Gregson seemed content with that answer. "Where did your aneurysm come from?" I had wanted to know from the beginning, but didn't want to interrupt the more important proceedings. "They show up every so often in my family. Likely the stress I went through triggered mine." I nodded. Aortic aneurysms had a nasty way of just existing, and then showing up to kill a body when they least expected it. "Well, if I have answered all your questions, I wouldn't mind being taken in. I am more than ready for a good, long rest." "All in due time, Dr. Hope. But why a cabby?" Hope looked surprised. "I'm shocked you have to ask, Mr. Holmes. Being a cabbie is perfect for hunting someone down. There's a good chance that you'll run into them, and you can learn the territory." "I suppose that is how you found Drebber, then?" Hope nodded, and Holmes continued. "Then why the 2 pills?" Hope's face grew dark. "They didn't respect my Lucy. She chose me, and they ignored her right to make that choice. They forced themselves upon her. I wanted them to squirm, so I gave them more of a chance than they gave her. Take the pill and accept the risk, or I would kill them then and there." Holmes looked thoughtful. "And Drebber took the risk while Stangerson did not." Hope sighed. "I believe Stangerson thought himself capable of winning a fight, but I had a knife, and he did not." "Fair enough, Doctor. Gregson, Lestrade, you have your man. You may take him away now." Jefferson Hope did not last even another 2 days. I have always had a theory that we all need something external to keep us alive, and as soon as we lose that reason for living, the body ceases to function. Jefferson Hope reaffirmed that belief. The whole affair was in the papers not long after Hope's death. The article painted him as a wronged hero who sought well-deserved vengeance for the wrongdoings of Stangerson and Drebber. What really surprised me about the article, though, was that it was credited as being solved by Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard with the help of Dr. Watson representing the Red Cross. Upon reading this, I hurried as best I could to the sewing room, where Holmes sat busily working away at something. "What is this?" I threw the paper down onto his work. "A newspaper," he had the audacity to answer me dryly. "Yes, Holmes, I can see that, but why am I mentioned in it?" "This, Watson, is why you need to pay attention when my brother is asking a favor of you." He had a smug and chiding tone, and I felt my back muscles tense in annoyance. "What did I miss?" He smiled. "As Mycroft explained at dinner, he has an influence on what stories make it into the paper. In this case, we needed to ensure that the people didn't go into hysterics over a local murderer. As Madame Charpentier had already appealed to her contacts in the Red Cross to look into the matter of these poorly behaved volunteers, it was decided that the Red Cross should investigate the matter of his death. But we didn't know that he had been killed until after dinner." Holmes gave an odd smile at this statement. "True, we didn't." His strange stressing of "we" unnerved me. "Still, why am I in the paper?" Holmes sighed, exasperated. "The matron and Mycroft asked you to look into it, remember? You were to be the de facto face of the cross. As such, it was to be your name credited in the paper." I cursed. Of course it was. I had been so stupid. No wonder Holmes had been needling me about not paying attention. "Do watch your language, Doctor. I'm not fond of the foul type." I squinted at him before sighing and giving in. My name being in the paper wasn't exactly that big of a deal. It would give Mother back home something to brag about at any rate. I looked to Holmes' project, which he had resumed, and realization struck. "Is that for Mary?" "She does have eyes!" I, not appreciating the comment, huffed. Mary was not yet very large, but would likely need other garments soon. I recognized the pattern Holmes was sewing for what it was. "I do have a niece, you know, and I assisted in her birth. I know what a pregnancy garment looks like." "I'm sure you do, Dr. Watson, but you know that was not what I was commenting on." "Why do you sew?" Holmes glanced up at me. "I believe I already explained that." I shook my head. "Why do you sew for others?" He frowned at me. "I enjoy it, Doctor. Before this war broke out, cases would either be one after the other, or very few with long intervals between them. I tried several ways to rid myself of the boredom, and only found two which worked: opioids and sewing." He had stopped sewing once more, and looked me dead in the eye as he spoke. A shudder ran through me as I thought of what narcotics can do to a mind when used improperly. Mary found out what I was doing and made me promise to sew whenever I was bored, so that is what I do now. Still, it is the act of designing and fitting that I find more stimulating than this. He gestured at the machine before him, though I will admit I find it to be quite soothing. Guilt ran through me. A nasty habit I have is taking the responsibilities of others upon my shoulders. I feel as though their shortcomings are somehow my fault, and in this moment that feeling was severe. Why? I couldn't be certain. Perhaps it was how much he reminded me of my grandmother. Perhaps that's just how I was. Either way, I had a request for the man. "Do you think you could turn my shirts into something more flattering?" He smiled at me. "There's no need to feel pity, Dr. Watson. My shortcomings are mine to deal with." I shuffled in place. "Still, Mary won't give them back, and they're warmer than these blouses." He began sewing once more. "I suppose I could do something about them. At the very least, I can take them in so you have better range of motion." He glanced me over. "You could do with another skirt as well." He paused in thought, and I wasn't sure if I should say anything. Then a thought came to mind. "Would it be possible for me to accompany you on your next case?" He laughed loudly. "Mycroft was right about you, Doctor." "What is that supposed to mean?" "Take no offense, Watson. He simply suspected that you liked some excitement. Very well. You may accompany me next time. Just make certain you bring your revolver." I felt it was best not to ask how he knew about my revolver.